Hi, do you want to live to be 100 or maybe even 120? Well, it's a good thing you're watching this episode of the Doctor Podcast Show, which is episode number 64. And I'm your host, Dr. Robert Seichert. Today, we're going to be discussing longevity and aging. Everybody's very interested in staying young, looking young, and basically not aging. And today, I'm very fortunate, and we're fortunate to have a great guest who's one of the world's leading experts on aging. It's Dr. S.J. Olshansky. Dr. Olshansky is a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He's also a research associate at the Center on Aging at the University of Chicago and at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He's also the chief scientist at Lapidus Solutions, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The focus of Dr. Olshansky's research is on estimates of the upper limits to human longevity. How long can we go? And the pursuit of the scientific means to slow aging in people. Dr. Olshansky is also on the board of directors of the American Federation of Aging Research, which is one of the top organizations that is studying aging and longevity. So, Jay, thanks very much for taking the time from your busy schedule to come on the Doctor Podcasts show today. We really appreciate that.
Happy to be on. We've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah. All right. And we're going to stay young during this show, so that's good. So what initially sparked your interest in aging and longevity, and how has your focus evolved over the years in studying that subject?
I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago in the late 70s. I was taking a graduate class by a scientist by the name of Bernice Newgarden, who was well known in human development. And she was talking about the great heterogeneity or diversity that exists among older people. And I was only 24 years old at the time. I didn't know anything. So I raised my hand and I said, "Excuse me, but I disagree with you. They're just all old." And Dr. Newgarden, Bernice, who I later came to know quite closely personally, said, "Jay, I've got an assignment for you." And she asked me to look into the demographics of what would happen if we could slow biological aging in people. And I basically went to the Regenstein Library at the University of Chicago and didn't leave for 3 years. And I ended up writing a paper for that class, which I turned into my master's thesis, and I've been running on this topic ever since.
Wow. So you have decades of experience there. That's interesting. Can you describe what your most recent research project is on aging and longevity, and what kind of breakthroughs have you encountered?
Well, so we're taping this on September the 3rd. I've got a manuscript that is coming out in about 2 to 3 weeks in Nature Aging. So I'm going to give you a preview.
Oh, great.
So back in 1990, my colleagues and I published a lead article in Science where we predicted that the upper limit to human longevity is about 85 years, about 88 for women and 82 for men. And we said that the limit exists because of a phenomenon known as entropy in the life table, which is basically another way of saying the longer we live, on average as a population, the more difficult it becomes to raise life expectancy further. There were a large number of people who disagreed with us and said, no, 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 advances in technology are going to accelerate rapidly in the 21st century. Life expectancy will accompany it. And we should expect most of us to live to 100, 110, 120. And we said, no, that's not going to happen. So we waited 30 years, which is pretty rare in science, to see who was right. We actually took a look at all of the data from the longest lived populations across the globe. And in fact, exactly as we had predicted in 1990, even in the face of advances, or I suppose a tailwind of advances in medical technology that have pretty dramatically influenced survival among people with a broad range of diseases, the rise in life expectancy decelerated, it slowed down across the globe. And the primary reason, it's not rocket science. The primary reason is that most people now in long-lived populations live out to much older ages, in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And they are exposed to the currently immutable biological process of aging. So as more people get exposed to the force of aging, the more difficult it becomes to raise life expectancy further. And that's what the new paper is all about. The title of the new paper is Implausibility of Radical Life Extension in Humans in the 21st Century. And it's basically our way of saying all of this stuff about living to 100, living to 120, it's all nonsense. Some of us will make it out there, but the vast majority of us will not. The vast majority of all humans will die between the ages of 65 and 95, even if we make progress against major fatal diseases in the population. It's a reality check on duration of life, and that's coming out in a few weeks.
So are you saying that that's built into our genes, our genetics, and that the nutrition and psychology and technology and environment, no matter what we do with those, it's just built into the gene and we're not going to change that?
So here's the way I want listeners to think about this. The conventional view of aging by many, and it came through in your question, by the way, the conventional view of many is that the maximum duration of life for humans, or I suppose the natural duration of life for humans, is somewhere ahead of us on the horizon. And all we have to do is eat right and exercise and have go see our doctor and have our doctor fix us when things go wrong, push us out the door, repeat until failure. That's the conventional view, that the limit's somewhere in front of us. We will argue in this new manuscript, and this will be hard for a lot of people to understand, I believe. We will argue in this new manuscript that the natural limit for human longevity is in fact behind us. It is far behind us by decades, and that the vast majority of the rise in life expectancy in the modern era is a result of medicine manufacturing survival time for people who otherwise would have died in the absence of those medical interventions. So stents work, pharmaceuticals work. All of these interventions that we've created in the modern era are miracle workers. They are amazing in their
Right.
ability to manufacture survival time. If you pull them out of a population, the question is, how long would we live? And we argue that the natural limit for human longevity is probably closer to 60. It might actually even be earlier than that. And so the difference between 60 and where we are today, depending on where you are, but roughly 20 to 25 years, is a byproduct of manufactured survival time. And so we are moving away from the limit, not towards it. And therein lies the
That,
problem.
that's an interesting concept that I hadn't considered. So what you're saying is that we really should be living like to caveman times where they maybe live to 30 or 40, just old enough to reproduce and replicate your DNA, and then you're not needed anymore. Once you have kids and progeny, then there's no point in you hanging around anymore. Is that
Well,
kind of what you're saying?
so I think the best way to think of it is we're the time that we live now into middle and older ages is not just a byproduct of manufactured time, time that is created by medical technology, but perhaps over engineering. In order for humans to make it to 30 years or 40 years or even 45 years, which I think probably would, is roughly the end of the reproductive window, sometime between 45 and 50. And then you have to live a certain number of years beyond that to ensure the reproductive success of your offspring. That's how we came up with 60.
Right.
Basically, that's a byproduct of fixed genetic programs that exist in our species for growth, development, and reproduction. And senescence or aging is an inadvertent byproduct of those genetic programs for early life developmental events. And we're not changing those programs anytime soon. So most of us living in older ages, in all likelihood, you and I, certainly me, we're living on time that was created by our doctors, by public health. And the problem is that when you make us live longer into our 70s, our 80s, our 90s, we run up against the biological process of aging as the primary risk factor for us. And currently that's immutable. And so you're pushing up against a dense forest, not a brick wall, but a dense forest of aging, and therein lies the problem.
That's interesting concept that I didn't consider. But how do you explain that there's a lot more people who are over 100 around the planet? And I think I saw a lady in France who's 122, has the world's record.
So
There seem to be more and more people who are living beyond 100. How do you explain that?
there are, and it's actually incredibly simple. It has little to do with manufactured survival time. It has more to do with past fertility rates. So when birth rates 100 years ago were high and on the rise, the size of the birth cohorts kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you increase population size, the probability of people making it out to older and older ages increases. Look, I'm going to tell you exactly when we are going to experience an explosion of centenarians. I'm going to give you the exact date.
Really?
It's 2042. And the reason why it's going to begin in 2042 is because the baby boom began in 1942, exactly 100 years earlier. So 100 years later, these larger birth cohorts increase the probability of the number of octogenarians, nonagenarians, and centenarians making it out to extreme old age. So it's easy to confuse prevalence, which is what you're talking about,
Right.
prevalence of the number of older individuals and life expectancy. And those two need to be decoupled because you can actually have a decline in life expectancy, which is exactly what happened in the United States, and an increase in the number of older individuals as a result of past high fertility rates.
That's interesting. So you're saying that somewhere built into our genetic code is our basically life expectancy. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, the
Well,
duration of life of humans and other sexually reproducing species is calibrated to something that has nothing at all to do with how we live our lives. It's calibrated to the onset and length of the reproductive window. So species that go through puberty early and have short reproductive windows live short lives, like a mouse. A mouse goes through puberty at 30 days. It has a short reproductive window and they live about 1,000 days. A Greenland shark, by contrast, goes through puberty at 150 years of age and they can live for over 500. We're somewhere in the middle.
wow.
Yes, these are fixed genetic programs for growth and development, not for aging, but for growth, development, and reproduction. We can't have programs that cause us to age. We can't have programs that cause us to die. Evolution could not have given rise to programs that do those things. But, for the same reason you and I probably can't run a 4-minute mile, it has to do with our body design. We don't have a program that says we can't run a 4-minute mile, but we can't. And the reason has to do with the inherited body design that you and I and most other people have. It's the same thing with longevity. We don't have genetic programs for aging or for death, but we can't live much longer than we do now because of basic body design.
Interesting. But what if we are able to eventually decipher the entire genetic code and also the epigenetics and then modify that? Because we have now CRISPR technologies and we have even newer technologies that allow us to change DNA pairs or DNA bases. So if we can figure out which genes are responsible for that limit, what if we modify those genes in an embryo? Uh,
Yeah. Look, aging science is heading in that direction, in an ability to modify some of the basic biological processes of aging, and I'm enthusiastically supporting that work. It's critically important to extending health span going forward among future cohorts of older individuals. But keep in mind, we still have Achilles heels in these bodies that make it, at this moment anyway, virtually impossible for any sort of radical life extension to occur. And there's a favorite cartoon that I show of a man who's with his wife, and they're measuring his height. And they began measuring his height at 60, which was up here. And then at 65, it's here, 70, 75, 80, right? It keeps going down. So we keep losing height because of this compression of the vertebrae. So we have some Achilles heels, both in terms of muscle mass, bone density, and loss of neurons. So unless whatever it is that we do, all of these interventions that you're talking about, unless they can alter the aging of every single component of the body, including especially the human brain, we are going to be limited by basic body design. In other words, you could make hearts last longer, lungs, kidneys, even some of our joints, we can replace them, but you can't replace the brain yet. In the absence of replacing the brain, that's going to be our Achilles heel.
That's interesting. Unless we can somehow link to a computer and download our brain there and just carry it in our
Yeah,
smartphone.
that's great science fiction. But in the real world of science, that's unlikely anytime soon. But it's fun to talk about. And I do like the movies that come out. But when people talk about that as sort of the wave of the future, I basically say, look, why don't we just stop making rocket ships that take us into space and start building teleportation devices? Because why waste the time and the money building rocket ships when we can just get there instantly? It's great science fiction, but in the real world of science, yeah, that's got to stop.
Not happening. What about that the leading cause of deaths in the USA and most of the Western world is heart disease and cancer. Those are like the top two. If we were to able to eliminate or markedly reduce the incidence of heart disease, and I think we're getting there in the near future, and also prevent or treat cancer more effectively, won't that raise everybody's age? They'll live longer if we can just eliminate those two things.
Yes, but not by much. So we published on this in a article in Science in 1990. So it's, the message has been out there for a few decades. So a cure for cancer would yield about a 3 to a 3.5 year increase in life expectancy at birth. That's all.
That's it.
Yeah, a cure for cardiovascular disease might get us 4 to 4.5 years. You start adding them up together, and it ends up being, maybe 10 years at most, and it might push life expectancy up into our mid to late 80s, depending on whether you're a male or a female. And so that's a calculation we've done. We've already demonstrated that it won't have nearly the impact on life expectancy that people think. And that's because, as I said earlier, aging is unaltered and uninfluenced by the very phenomenon you talked about. If you cure cancer, you cure cardiovascular disease, aging marches on. The damage that accumulates to the cells, the tissues, the organs, and organ systems as a result of the damages that's being added by living continues, even if we cure these major diseases. So we still have some Achilles heels. Again, I would not focus so much on life extension. I'm less interested in making us live longer, and I'm much more interested in making us live healthier longer, which, I know you're going to be talking and asking about health span. That's the wave of the future, frankly.
Right. So tell us about health span as opposed to lifespan.
Well, look, if somebody lives for, let's just say 90 years and 85 of those years are healthy, and the last 5 years there's some frailty and disability, then the health span of that individual would have been 85 years. The care span would be about 5 years, which, is the difference between total lifespan and health span. And so what we're trying to do in the modern era is shorten the amount of frailty and disability in the population, sort of compress disability and old age so that we could remain healthier longer, so that, 70 is the new 60 or 80 is the new 70. That's really what aging science and geroscience is all about, is trying to make us live healthier longer. And we can measure that. That's something that we can actually document if an intervention actually works to make us live healthier longer. You should see a delay in the onset and age progression of multiple diseases simultaneously, if indeed we can slow the biological process of aging. But life extension, and especially radical life extension, is an untestable scientific hypothesis. If somebody comes along with a bottle of pills and they say these are going to make you live to 150, well, you might want to ask, how do you know that? Since no one has ever lived to 150.
Right.
And if you're going to introduce this into a population, yeah, giving it to somebody who's already 115, thinking that they're going to add an additional 35 years or whatever to their lifespan, I think are mistaken in this particular belief. It would have, if there's some sort of intervention like that, it would have to occur at a much earlier age. So there's a lot of embellishment and a lot of exaggeration in the field today. We don't need embellishment and exaggeration to recognize that there will be a lot more older people in the population, and it's far more important that we make them healthy than we make them live longer.
Hmm.
And that's the primary message that my colleagues and I have been trying to make.
Right. Now, you brought up the bottle of pills, so I want to get into that aspect because there have been lots of things sold on the internet and read about it everywhere about things that extend life. One of your colleagues, Dr. David Sinclair, who's a pretty famous aging guru up at Harvard, apparently about 6 months ago, claimed that he was able to reverse aging in dogs. And there was a lot of controversy about that because the product that he was selling, he actually owned the company. And as a result of this, apparently it was a big scandal. And he resigned as a result as the president of the Academy for Health and Lifespan Research. Can you tell us what happened there with Dr. Sinclair and his claim about reversing aging in dogs? And
Well, look, in all likelihood, it will be possible to modulate or influence the rate of senescence in individuals. Whether it's been done in dogs or not, I'm not entirely certain. And I don't know all the details of what happened with David. And I know him personally, and he's a friend, uh, quite frankly. But there is a tendency in our field for embellishment and exaggeration, especially by those involved in creating companies that are selling longevity for a living. Keep in mind, they have investors, they have products to sell. And so if you can convince people to buy these products or invest in the creation of them, then there's a lot of money to be made in this industry. And even some scientists have crossed the line into embellishment and exaggeration. Now, I don't know if David said this will lengthen your life, because that would be a hard one to prove. But if you can reverse attributes of aging in dogs, I wouldn't be surprised if that's possible or plausible. Look, I can just tell you, just from personal experience, by losing 20 pounds in the last 5 or 6 months, I literally reversed some of the negative attributes associated with my blood chemistry. Cholesterol came down, blood sugar came down. So what did I do? I reversed some of the signs and symptoms associated with aging. Am I growing younger? No, I am not growing younger, but I
you
have
look younger
lowered.
to me.
Yeah, right. Well, it's all relative to what. But you can lower your risk of a number of diseases and disorders. And I think that's where this line of research is headed. Again, it is tempting to embellish and exaggerate. I think we see that among some scientists, especially the ones that are creating companies. And so I'm always cautioning against it. We don't actually need to embellish and exaggerate to emphasize the importance of this work on geroscience and efforts to slow aging. It's foundational, groundbreaking work in public health that I think will have a profound influence on the health and quality of life of people that make it to older ages in the future. We don't have to embellish and exaggerate to support this work on geroscience. It's just not needed.
Right. So now I want to get into some of the other products that supposedly have this longevity benefit. One of the famous ones again was resveratrol, which Dr. Sinclair was involved with as well. Initially, that seemed to be the cure, but then the further research indicated that it really wasn't. What's the story with that? And I know it's still being sold on the internet, and some people take it.
Well, if somebody tells you that resveratrol is going to make you live longer, it's the easiest thing to do is to ask for the scientific evidence to support that. So lifespan extension is not an easy thing to prove
Right.
in the world of aging science. And so if you don't have evidence that it actually extends life, I wouldn't take it. And, so, I mean, I know what happened with resveratrol, and I know the original company that David was involved with, it was bought out by GlaxoSmithKline, and they closed down the clinical trials. And I don't know what the exact claims were associated with it. But if life extension was one of them, then there's reason to be skeptical right there. I think probably what they're going to be zeroing in on is not necessarily life extension itself, but some of the biomarkers that seem to measure rate of senescence or rate of aging. And if you can demonstrate that you can manipulate the biomarkers, you at least have suggestive evidence that it could influence health span, lifespan, and care span. And that's the way in which it should be presented, is that we have suggestive evidence. We don't have definitive empirical evidence that this will make you live any longer. In fact, honestly, I think it's going to be a tough nut to crack, a difficult thing to prove that you can make people live longer with resveratrol or any of these other interventions. I think the scientists should not be using lifespan extension as their primary endpoint. The primary endpoint or metric should be how healthy you are, the metric of health span. That you can measure in a relatively short time period. And if you see improvements in health span, my goodness, you've got something that's extraordinarily valuable. Anything that even produces a small increase in the health span of the population would have a dramatic positive impact on the economics of the country in which those people live and the individuals themselves. Just delaying the onset and age progression of all major fatal and disabling diseases by just a few years has a dramatic positive impact on the population.
That's interesting because currently the theory or the what most people say is that you need prospective studies to prove something in healthcare and medicine. But we can't do that with the aging process because it takes too many decades to figure it out. So we're actually only going to figure it out retrospectively in the future. And currently, retrospective studies are looked down upon in science and in medicine especially. So
Well,
we're kind of stuck in this area.
well, with regard to longevity, you're absolutely right. We cannot measure longevity gains associated with any of these interventions. In fact, in our new manuscript coming out, we basically say, radical life extension is an untestable scientific hypothesis. So please stop talking about it.
It's a good point.
But you can measure health span. So keep
Right.
in mind, if the study design is such that you've got a broad enough age range in the population and your sample sizes are large enough, you can actually measure age at onset, changes in the age at onset and age progression of all major fatal and disabling diseases simultaneously in short time windows. So you actually can get answers on whether or not these interventions will influence health span. Those answers you can get in short time periods. Lifespan, no, you're not going to get an answer to that.
Right.
And it should not be an endpoint. I mean, they'll look at it long term, but if you're trying to sell a product or develop something that's designed to influence aging in any way, lifespan extension can't be something that you promise because you can't measure it.
Right. So we should stick to measuring the current biomarkers that we already know are predictable.
Yeah, I mean, things that you can actually measure across time that give you a sense of the real health of the population, and that is entirely doable. And I can tell you, by the way, that my colleagues and I met with the scientists at the Food and Drug Administration at the FDA. And if you want to watch the video, it's on National Geographic called "The Age of Aging," where we met with them and the scientists at the FDA got it. We were a bit concerned that, they operate in a one treatment, one disease mode. And we were saying, no, this is different. This is one treatment, multiple disease endpoints. And not only did the FDA get it, but the FDA bent over backwards to help us with the research design. And the initial compound that was being tested was metformin. But we basically opened the door. We believe we opened the door to a large number of research studies in the field of aging to test potential therapeutics to influence this health span. And the FDA is on our side. They get it. And by the way, I would not, and this should be part of the discussion, aging itself is not a disease. And I think that there's a tendency for many people to think of it as a disease, and that we should call it a disease so that we can have a treatment for it. I don't think aging is any more of a disease than puberty and menopause are diseases. These are sort of natural parts of the or events that occur in the human body with the passage of time, but it doesn't mean you can't manipulate it. It doesn't mean, it's inherently modifiable. We don't have aging programs. We don't have death programs. So this progression of these bodies from young to old is something that is inherently modifiable, and we can and should be modifying it.
Very interesting. What I want to talk about some of the other pills in a bottle that are promoted in various articles and also on the internet. One of them is NAD. That's talked about a lot. And also, a lot of my patients take these substances thinking they're going to harm it. Do you have any comments about NAD?
No, not directly about NAD. I would actually prefer not to comment, not because I hold some special knowledge, but because I don't hold special knowledge about NAD. The one thing I would urge great caution about is having doctors and patients experiment on themselves with compounds and interventions that have not been tested for safety and efficacy. Now, back in 1980, there were some stories that appeared there was one article that appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine about the use of growth hormone as a potential aging intervention. You remember that? So some doctors started prescribing it for their patients as an aging intervention. As an aging intervention? What a horrible idea. This was before growth hormone was tested for safety and efficacy. Does it work, and does it do no harm? Actually, I should reverse that. Does it do no harm, which is the first thing you need to prove, and then does it actually do what you think it's going to do or say it's going to do? That's efficacy. And it wasn't proven, and yet doctors were prescribing it. Now, if NAD is being prescribed as an aging intervention with the claim that it will make you live longer or that it will make you live healthier longer, then the doctor is probably misprescribing this particular substance because the evidence is not in there yet certainly for efficacy. I'm not quite so sure about safety. But yeah, and then I've been to meetings where people are conducting experiments on themselves using,
Really?
genetic engineering, and I've shown up at these conferences and I'd say, why, would you have taken the COVID vaccine before it was tested for safety and efficacy just because it's there? Of course not. you want these to be tested using the tools of science and medicine to make sure they're safe, to make sure that they don't do harm. And keep in mind, growth hormone was eventually discovered to be a risk factor for brain cancer. So no one should be taking this as an aging intervention anymore, and no one should have been taking it back in the 1980s. And some of the strongest proponents for growth hormone ended up dying from brain cancer associated with the use of this. So, yeah,
There's
I don't.
still people out there, though, injecting growth hormone and testosterone variants, claiming that it's keeping them younger and more fit, so on.
Well, there may be some benefits to replacing testosterone. Um, Longevity isn't one of them. Keep in mind that one of the main arguments that I've made certainly in our new manuscript is that medicine works, that it's incredibly powerful. These are biologically active compounds. Our bodies respond to them, not always good, but often good. And these, statins work. I mean, they're actually remarkable interventions that lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. There's, hypertension drugs that are incredibly powerful. They restore mortality risk back to the average in a population. Those have been proven
Right,
safe and efficacious, but some of these other interventions have not. And they often go unregulated and are administered by both physicians or by people just buy them on the internet.
right,
And they're often produced in China or India or Israel, and nobody actually knows what's in them.
right.
Uh, so yeah,
Same for rapamycin. I've read that some celebrities are taking rapamycin. Same story there.
yeah, I would not touch any of these compounds unless, first of all, I know exactly what's in them.
Right.
Uh, and then I would have to have some demonstration of safety, rule number one. And then number two,
Above all, do no harm. Right.
yeah, that's the first rule, do no harm. And then efficacy, does it actually do anything? And if you don't have those three pieces of information, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And yet people seem to be willing to experiment on themselves. And perhaps some of these people are the same ones that aren't willing to take a vaccine that's been demonstrated to be safe and efficacious, and which can lower the risk of a broad range of infectious diseases. It's just amazing how we operate sometimes.
Right. It's sometimes difficult to figure it out. Now, you mentioned metformin. Is there enough evidence that metformin keeps you healthier, promotes health span, or even lifespan? What's your opinion on metformin?
So, first of all, metformin has been around for a long time. So the safety profile has been well established in people.
Right.
So
Diabetics are on it for many years, decades.
exactly. So rule number one has been fulfilled, right? Do no harm. It looks as though the majority of the population are okay using metformin. Some people react poorly to it and they need to get off it immediately, but that's with any drug, including
Right.
aspirin. But it looks as though some of the data following people that are diabetics that have been taking metformin have demonstrated that diabetics on metformin live longer than non-diabetics. So there's some powerful retrospective studies that have demonstrated that metformin seems to have some properties associated with decelerated aging and a lowered risk of a broad range of diseases and disorders. And that's the trial that the American Federation for Aging Research is trying to get initiated under the guidance of Dr. Barzilai, Nir Barzilai at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So yeah, there is some pretty good evidence that there's strong evidence that it's safe. There is some pretty good evidence that it may be efficacious, but now we need to do the clinical trial. So would I touch it in advance? No.
Right.
But is there pretty good evidence that it might actually do something? Yes. And the clinical trial needs to be done first before anybody puts this in their body.
I think that clinical trial's already running or has just started, not
Uh,
mistaken. Do you know when it's going to be completed or not?
I don't know the answer to that, but if NEAR has started it, it would have been only recently. And I don't know what the funding profile looked for that project because I didn't think it was fully funded.
I see.
But if it has started, that's great. I mean, I would be strongly in favor of seeing that metformin trial moved along as quickly as possible because, that's going to help us with research design going forward, testing other potential therapeutics that could slow aging as well.
Right. I'm an ophthalmologist and I have more and more patients who take metformin. And so I asked them, are you diabetic? Because I need to know with regard to their eye health. And they say, no, my doctor told me to take it because it may keep me healthier and along my life. So I'm seeing more and more of that. So word of that is getting out. We'll
Yeah,
see
I
what.
mean, yeah, it's hard. I get it. Doctors want to do what's best for their patients. I get that. Um, uh, there just has to be a word of caution on being, on jumping to conclusions about lowering the risk of a broad range of diseases. You know, if I had patients, I was an MD, I was not be recommending these substances until they're safe. But remember, I'm a professor of public health.
Right.
My job is to protect public health, and so I zero in on protection first, safety first, and then efficacy. It's got to be in that order. So,
All right. Let's go to the latest pill in a bottle, which is Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound. They treat diabetes, they cause weight loss, which is very important in keeping people healthy, as you mentioned earlier. And there are some early studies that they may be brain protective, neuron protective. And there's some thought that they may actually increase longevity. What's your opinion on that?
well, I'd certainly like to see the evidence that would increase longevity, because I would be very skeptical of that. But probably that would come from the suggestion that it could lower the risk of diabetes related complications by lowering weight. And I get that. Of course, you could do that for free without any of these drugs simply by losing weight. It's easy for me to
But
say.
that's hard to do.
It's hard to do. I'm doing it myself,
Awesome.
quite frankly, but it is hard work. I will admit, people are looking for exercise and a shot, and it looks as though that's what this is. But I don't think we really have a sense yet of what the long-term consequences are going to be for the use of some of these drugs. So I don't know what's going to happen with people that are taking Ozempic. I don't actually know if they're going to have to take it the rest of their lives, or if they, are able to get off of it once they actually lose weight. So I don't know how the body's going to respond um, to withdrawal from some of these drugs, and I don't know if it's going to have any secondary effects. I don't know
Right.
that the doctors prescribing them are going to know that either. And so, yeah, once again, I'll tell you what this reminds me of. Uh, Way back when I was a kid, my parents moved from the use of butter to the use of margarine because they were
Right.
told pretty much the same thing, that, oh yeah, butter is loaded with cholesterol. You probably don't want to be eating that, but this margarine has no cholesterol at all. Of course, they didn't say that it has loaded with trans fats, and the trans fats are harmful to heart health. And so what did we do? We transitioned over to something that we thought was healthy for us that we later discovered was not. And so that's, again, it's the reason why you want to test all of these interventions for safety and efficacy and do the best that you can to figure out what the longer
Right.
term consequences might be. The problem is that you have to wait a long time to
Right.
know
People are
what.
impatient. They want
Yeah,
immediate cures, but
yeah.
it's very difficult or impossible to do that.
And so what are they doing then? They're conducting an experiment on themselves. And I am strongly against conducting experiments on our own bodies. I've probably conducted a few experiments on my own. I remember one was, I was reading up on the value of green tea, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I
That's
started
a hot
drinking,
one.
yeah, I mean, I started drinking more and more green tea until I developed kidney stones. as a result of drinking green tea. So I stopped doing that. So it sort of reminded me of, the caution associated with using any of these interventions when you've never used them before. You don't know how your body's going to react.
Right.
And in the absence of that information, yeah, maybe
So,
not.
so that's interesting because even though you're an expert in this field, a leading expert, you actually fell into the trap of experimenting on yourself to see
Well,
if it would work, right?
yeah, I mean, drinking. So I was experimenting only in the sense that the evidence suggests that there are some compounds contained within green tea that are healthy
Right.
for you. I wasn't expecting to live longer as a result. I was expecting some health benefits associated with it, lowered risk, and sure enough, there was a negative trade-off associated with it. But drinking green tea is not the same as shooting yourself up with Ozempic or growth hormone.
Right.
I would, one is not an unusual thing to be drinking on a normal basis, and the other is something totally foreign to our body,
Right.
and how our bodies react to it. That's the big question.
So how does exercise, we talked about a few times, how does exercise keep us healthier? Do we know the exact mechanism of what happens there other than the weight loss, which we know is beneficial?
Well, so this probably is a question better asked of exercise physiologists because they could get into the mechanisms involved. But let me put it this way. Um, Exercise is roughly the equivalent of an oil, lube, and a filter for your car. You don't have to do it, but when you do, your car operates much more efficiently for a much longer time period.
I like that.
Yeah, exercise is like flossing your teeth. You don't have to floss your teeth, but when you do, you can make these teeth last a whole lot longer. We basically learned the mechanism through which we can retain this dentition in a healthy state for a longer time period. That's why you go see your dental hygienist every, 4 or 6 months, because dental health, oral health is critical to the health of the whole body. So it's the same thing with any of these other types of interventions, but exercise probably more than anything else is the only equivalent of a fountain of youth that exists today. It has a remarkable effect on everyone at every age. Even if you're a centenarian, exercise will provide benefits on the day you do it. You don't have to wait weeks, months, years for the benefit of some pill that you're taking or shot that you're giving yourself. No, the benefits of exercise are immediate, and it's free.
Right.
That's you don't have to buy it.
Well, that's why people don't do it because it's free. And if it's free, it can't be too good. If I pay a lot for it and like NAD or something, then it must be good, I think is
there are very few interventions that exist that have the health benefits of exercise. Um, in fact, there may not be any other interventions that exist that have the health benefits of exercise. Sure, diet is important to be sure, but keeping these bodies moving is critical. And, once you go horizontal, especially at later ages, you begin losing muscle mass very quickly. And
right.
that loss of muscle mass is permanent. You can increase the size of those muscle fibers. Once you start losing them, they're gone forever.
Right.
And the heart muscle is one of those muscle fibers that you need to be concerned about. So exercise is about as good as it gets in the way of an intervention now.
What about diet? The talk now is the Mediterranean diet or variations of it. Has that been proven or is it?
Yes. So the Mediterranean diet, for sure, has been proven to lower the risk of a broad range of diseases and disorders. Keep in mind, by the way, even people on the Mediterranean diet, they still age, they still grow old, they still die from the same
Really?
as everyone else. Well, you have to realize that in the world of embellishment and exaggeration, it really is not the right question to be asking, because some of these people are claiming that they can all live to 100 or 120, and that doesn't happen. Even
Right.
in these so-called blue zones where people allegedly live very long lives. Probably it's associated with diet, but in all likelihood, it's associated with genetics in these subgroups of the population. And, just because you adopt a Mediterranean diet doesn't mean you're going to live as long as people from Sardinia or, if you adopt a diet that's consistent with those from Okinawa, that you'll live as long as the Japanese. It doesn't work that way. But would we all benefit from eating right, avoiding the fats in the diet and the carbohydrates and lowering our caloric intake? Absolutely. Diet and exercise are the things that we can control today, and they're extraordinarily powerful. They're not the magic fountain of youth, but they can certainly lower the risk of a broad range of diseases and disorders. But most importantly of all, diet and exercise will influence health span, how healthy you are, how healthy you feel. Again, I know this from personal experience. By just having lost 20 pounds, the effects are dramatic.
Yeah.
Talk to me in about 3 months, I will have lost another 10 pounds, and I will have achieved the weight that I want to achieve. And I've already experienced the benefits of weight loss. And I know by personal experience what that is.
How did you accomplish that? Exercise and just caloric restriction?
No, I didn't calorically restrict at all. What I did was I basically eliminated all sugar,
Hmm,
most fats, all processed foods are gone, very little dairy. I avoided, inflammatory foods. And then I'm walking about 5 miles a day. And that was it.
great.
It was just eating a little bit less and eating right and exercising more. And I'm losing about 1 to 2 ounces of fat per day. And that's
Wow.
it. That's it. I mean, that's in my head. That was the way in which I think. I walk 5 miles. I'm targeting 1 to 2 ounces of fat, and it's worked. Not complicated. It's not rocket science.
That's great. You just have to stick to it. A lot of people have difficulty sticking to it. That's why they get the Ozempic infection.
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
the topic of exercise and the heart, I've always been curious as to why the maximum heart rate decreases with age. I've spoken to many cardiologists about this, and none of them really has a good answer. I think that's one of the markers of aging. And that's why athletes reach their prime sometime in their mid 30s. You don't see any tennis stars in their 40s or track and field athletes in their 40s and so on. Any idea why the maximum heart rate decreases with age?
No. And if the cardiologists don't know, I don't know. So it's a good question. I mean, look, in all likelihood, it's related to the basic process of senescence that occur in
Right.
our body. So loss of muscle mass, the inability of these bodies to operate. Look, I used to be a marathon runner, and I can't run as fast as I used to. I mean, I stopped running actually several years ago because of spinal stenosis, but
Uh,
my ability to run, or our ability to move as fast as we did when we were younger, changes with the passage of time. I will say, importantly, because I have been commenting recently on cognitive decline and change, because I've been asked a lot about the presidential candidates and whether or not they shouldn't be running for office because they're too old. And my
right.
response is that their age is irrelevant, completely irrelevant. You can have people in their 80s and 90s that can be president, that can do anything. Um, their cognitive functioning can be as good as, if not better than people at a younger age. And there are some things that actually get better as we get older. Crystallized intelligence, our ability to make wise decisions, improves as we get older. Happiness generally tends to get better as we get older. Yeah, there's some things we can't do as fast or as well as we did when we were younger, but there's other things that we can do better. Personally, I'm 70 years old. I just turned 70 in February. I'm actually a better writer and editor now than I was 30 years ago. And that has to do with
Right.
time, experience, and since that's pretty much what I do for a living is writing and teaching, yeah, some things actually get better with age.
That's great to hear that. You mentioned earlier about the Greenland shark, which lives for a few hundred years, and there are also some turtle species that live for a few hundred years. Have we analyzed their genes to figure out what keeps them around for so long? And maybe if we can figure out which gene or genes in combination do that, maybe we can modify our genetics to live
Well,
a few hundred years.
yeah, so there's a book written called Methuselah's Zoo by a good friend of mine by the name of Steve Ostad, who's looked at these other animals, including sea turtles and Greenland sharks and whatnot. And clearly these animals are protected uh, for a longer time period. I mean, look, I'm pretty sure sharks don't get cancer. And so how is it possible for an animal to live for 500 years and not get cancer and die from it? So absolutely, this is a fascinating area of research that should be pursued. But I actually think that that's not the best approach to addressing this issue that you're raising, which is genetic heterogeneity that exists not just across species, but within species. So there are people now, humans, that appear to be aging more slowly than the rest of us. Biological time seems to be ticking at a slower rate. You mentioned the 122-year-old woman. Her name was Jeanne Calmon from southern France. Look, she smoked for 100 years. Now, that's not, I tell my students, that's not a license to smoke.
Right.
It just means that it wasn't a risk factor for her. Well, what is it that protected her from the damaging effects of tobacco that seems to kill everyone else at a much younger age? So studying the genetics of centenarians and supercentenarians, which is the work of Nir Barzilai, Tom Pearls, and other scientists across the globe, is a really fertile area of research that I think is going to yield results probably faster than understanding the genetics of sea turtles and
Right.
Greenland sharks and trying to, you know, uh, develop the proteins that are saving them. But you never know. You never know what secrets are going to be revealed by understanding the dynamics of cancer protection in, another mammal like a whale that can live for 200 years and perhaps doesn't get cancer. I don't know how that happens. And these are questions we need to be answering.
So we're in the infancy of studying aging, it seems like.
Yeah, sort of. People have been talking about aging and aging interventions for thousands of years. I've referred to anti-aging medicine as the second oldest profession because people have been selling it for thousands
Right.
of years. And, it's all been nonsense until recently. Recently, it's now been demonstrated that you can actually manipulate the longevity of a broad range of species. It's inherently modifiable. So we are entering a new era in geroscience where I think with an accelerated effort, we probably can develop a gerotherapeutic that actually has an effect on extending the period of healthy life that we've never seen before. And I think that's why so much money is now being invested in geroscience, as it should be, to come up with this new um, way of dealing with this public health um, dilemma that we've put ourselves into, right? The dilemma is that, oh, guess what? Well, we now all live past the age of 65, or most of us, so now we get to experience aging. Now what? Well, now what? The what is we want to live healthier longer. And I think some of these interventions, senolytic compounds, for example, are being studied at the Mayo Clinic. These are compounds designed to remove zombie cells in the body that are associated with the dysfunction of organs and organ systems. There are a lot of pathways that researchers are now pursuing. I don't know which one's going to work, but it doesn't matter. They should all be pursued aggressively because we need them in a world in which the population is aging rapidly.
Right. Tell us about your company, Lapidus Solutions. Are you involved in some of these projects and experiments?
No, so Lapidus
Lapidus.
Solutions, yeah,
Mhm.
Lapidus has created a technology that's helping companies evaluate survival risk. So when individuals are planning for retirement, um, we want to provide them with as much information as possible on the likelihood of how long they're going to live. So we've used, and how long they're going to live healthy and how many years of frailty and disability they might expect so that they could plan better for the future. Or so that life insurance companies, for example, which are some of the companies that are utilizing our technology, will no longer have to send a nurse practitioner out to collect blood and urine. All they have to do is take a photograph of somebody's face, and you could pick up on their smoking status or body mass.
Really?
Yeah, with a photograph. No more
That's
blood.
using AI.
Yeah, using AI. So
Wow.
it's the utilization of science, aging science, and facial analytics to help organizations do what they do better, more efficiently at a lower cost, and it's for the primarily for the benefit of the people using it. So if you could access life insurance at a lower cost, less invasively, faster using your cell phone, why not? And that's what we've done
Wow.
quite successfully at Lapidus. We're not developing any aging interventions of
Okay.
any kind. That's not our thing.
So
We're
that's interesting. Using AI technology, you can figure out the health span, the care span, and help you figure out the lifespan.
Yeah, I mean, you have to realize that we're using population level data. So what we will do if we evaluated you, for example, we would say, well, somebody with your level of education, your income, your family history of longevity, your exercise routine, there's probably about a dozen things that we look at, on average, tend to live X number of years longer than average. And that we can document using the medical and the scientific literature. We also have a pretty good sense of how many years you're likely to be healthy. And then if you keep an eye on yourself and monitor once a year, just like anything else, you go to your doctor once a year for a checkup. You can go to this program once a year for a checkup and adjust your retirement plan accordingly. Look, one of the biggest mistakes that's being made in wealth management today is telling people that they should all plan to live to 100. That is horrible advice. People would never stop working and never get to enjoy life in their,
Right.
70s and 80s. They're not going. Most of them aren't going to make it to 100. But that's what they're being told. And so we're trying to provide some realistic estimates of survival and health so that people can plan better for the future. And
Do,
and we're getting a lot of traction on that.
do people want to know? I mean, does somebody want to, if they're 73 and you do your analysis and, oh, you've got a couple of years left.
So not everyone wants to know. We actually do a genetic analysis as well.
Oh,
So
you
you can
did?
actually download your raw data from 23andMe, and we will tell you whether or not you carry genetic polymorphisms associated with exceptional longevity. People definitely want to know that. Um,
Right.
Not everyone wants to know if they carry ApoE that's associated with Alzheimer's disease. So yeah, no, not everyone wants to know. But yeah, look, when you're planning for retirement, you can either plan based on the best available information that is hyper personalized to you, or you could say, I don't want to know. And that's your choice. If you want to make decisions on the absence of information, my goodness, that should be your choice. But the rest of
Right.
us are going to be making decisions based on information. And it's much smarter, we think, to utilize information about you personally rather than using some generic number that's not likely to happen.
Great idea. Great concept.
Yeah.
So this has been incredibly informative and educational for me, and I'm sure the audience out there will enjoy it as well. I've learned a lot, and I feel younger by just talking to you for an hour.
Well, very good. I hope it works. That means we have to keep talking to each other. Now, I can't guarantee you're going to live any longer, but if you're healthier and happier along the way, my goodness, it was worth it, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, this is episode number 64 of my show in about the last 15 months, and I want to go to episode 1000 at least. So,
I wish you the best.
all right, well, thanks very much. Thanks very much again for taking the time to appear on the program.
Thanks for having me.